The New York Giants have fired head coach Brian Daboll, a move that had to be made. We're going to break it all down for you coming up next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, welcome on in to our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. Thanks so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And if you're making us your first listen of the day, we appreciate that as well. Today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. All right, Giant fans, this is kind of an emergency podcast. We're coming to you a little earlier than usual. And I told you on Monday's show that if there was news to be reported, we would kind of fit that in first. And of course, there is news to be reported. Head coach Brian Daboll has been fired by the Giants. Not a surprise, to be honest with you. It was just a matter of when. Ownership decided enough was enough, so they made that move. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Then we're going to talk about the interim plan and what might change under interim head coach Mike Kafka. And then we'll look ahead beyond this season. And interestingly, this involves Joe Schoen as well. So that's what we're going to cover on today's podcast. So again, welcome on into everybody. All right, let's get into it. So when the Giants hired Brian Daboll back in 2022, the hope was, this is a guy who could come in, an offensive guru who had had success up in Buffalo, who had helped to develop Josh Allen into a top-tier quarterback. The hope was that he could replicate some of that success up in Buffalo with the Giants. And, in the beginning, he was on the right track, the right trail. All right. The Giants started off 7-2 under Brian Daboll with a brand new coaching staff that nobody really had ever seen work together. Okay. But things started to crack as the year went on. And what I mean by that is after a 7-2 start, the Giants only won 2 more games under Daboll that year. Now they finished 9-7-1. They made the postseason for the first time since 2016. They won their first postseason game for the first time since 2011. So all was right in the world. Brian Daboll was named, AP Coach of the Year. The future looked bright. Then the bottom fell out. And in retrospect, the bottom started to fall out towards the end of that first season because teams started getting film on the Giants and what they'd like to do. And the Giants never really adjusted, I think, to what teams were doing to counter their attacks. But anyway, moving forward, in year 2, despite having injuries and whatnot, the Giants had a losing season that continued in year 3. It continued in year 4. Over the last 3 years, the Giants have won just 11 games. They're 11-33 in that span. That includes a franchise worst 3-14 mark last year. All right, their 100th anniversary season, no less. They have the longest road losing streak right now. I believe it's at 11 games. They have lost 4 games in which they have had a 10-point lead or more. Right, they've let fourth quarter games slip away. Just a lot of dysfunction, if you will, with the Giants. And here's the thing that I think, really contributed to Daboll being fired. And I talked about this a little bit on Friday's show if you want to check this out. But there were several things, actually. Number one, Daboll's player development left a lot to be desired. All right. So, people sit here and they look at Evan Neal, for example, or Jalen Hyatt or Deonte Banks, and they say, oh, gosh, those guys are busts. They weren't busts coming out of college. If anything, they were highly rated, highly regarded around the league. Why haven't they developed under this team? Blame it on the coaching. Okay. You look at, the quarterback play, Daniel Jones, who, could never really get on track here in New York. You look at guys like Julian Love and Xavier McKinney. All those guys went elsewhere and suddenly they became good. That was kind of a damning statement against the coaching staff. And who leads that coaching staff? The head coach. You look at the defense. Now, some of you will disagree with me when I say that the Giants are way more talented on defense than what their record shows. I still believe that. But they haven't had the results. Who hired the defensive coordinator? Who decided to stick with the defensive coordinator and keep the status quo? The head coach. All right. You look at the beginning of the year, every season over the last 3 years, the Giants have looked ill prepared. They've looked sloppy. The tackling has been terrible. That all stems back to the type of training camp being run. Who plans all that? The head coach. All right. I talked on Friday about the country club atmosphere in the locker room with the pool tables and the ping pong tables and the lazy boy recliners and all the games that are all over the locker room. Who allows all that? The head coach. All right. I can go on. And I haven't even talked about, what happened this year with Jackson Dart and the quarterback, how Daboll just was so intent on getting Jackson Dart out of the blue medical tent in the Eagles game that he actually put the organization and himself at risk for a fine, which was levied against them. All those design runs, that keep going back to the well, that it was just a matter of time before Jackson Dart was going to get dinged. And unfortunately, he's been dinged. You look at the burying of talent. I mentioned Jalen Hyatt has, you're telling me that Gunnar Olszewski was a better option to replace Darius Slayton when he was being treated for a hamstring injury, when Gunnar Olszewski is primarily a slot receiver and, Hyatt is an outside receiver? I'm sorry, not buying that. Evan Neal can't get on the field, regardless of, run blocking prowess or whatever. Sorry. I mean, something's up there. You look at the kicker situation. I mean, I can go on and on and on about the little things that added up that created doubt about Brian Daboll as a head coach. And look, he's a nice guy. I like Brian as a person. As a head coach, I fear he was in over his head. That is the conclusion ownership reached. The results just weren't there, and they haven't been for a long time. So this move had to be made. And there was some thought that maybe they would let it continue, wait till the end of the year, because the Giants traditionally do not fire coaches mid-season. I think this is the 4th time in their history they have done so. But this had to be done because as these losses kept building up, the locker room was getting more and more disgruntled, and they were starting to tune things out. So unfortunately for the Giants, this move had to be made. It couldn't wait until the bye week, which is late this year. So here's where we're at. Daboll is out. Mike Kafka, the assistant head coach, offensive coordinator, has been named as the interim head coach. So in the next segment, I'm going to talk a little bit about what Kafka brings and what changes we could expect with Kafka now leading the program. Hey, Giant fans, if you're a business owner, here's the truth. SaaS promised to make work easier, but now the average company is buried by hundreds of apps that slow down your teams and simply don't work together. That's not SaaS, that's sad. Software as a disservice. That's why you need Rippling. Rippling is the unified platform for global HR, payroll, IT, and finance all in one place. They've helped millions of businesses replace a mess of disconnected tools with one system designed to give leaders clarity, speed, and control. By uniting your employees, teams, and departments in one system, Rippling removes the bottlenecks, busy work, and silos your software created. Everything from onboarding to payroll to IT access runs automatically and perfectly in sync. It's seriously simple to use and gives companies one source of truth for their people, data, and everything they touch. Whether you want to run your entire HR, IT, and finance operations as one, or just fill the gaps in your software stack, Rippling can do it all. And right now, you can get 6 months for free when you go to rippling.com/lockedonnfl. That's RIPPLING.com/lockedonnfl for 6 months free. Terms and conditions apply. Hey, Giant fans, the NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to the fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So go on and head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm Patricia Traina, your host, and we have kind of an emergency podcast here. Brian Daboll has been fired by the Giants. Moving ahead, it's going to be assistant head coach / offensive coordinator Mike Kafka. He's going to get a chance to audition for the role permanently. All right. So, what can we potentially expect from Kafka? First, let's just touch upon one thing, a big question I think a lot of you have. There have been no other changes announced to the staff at this time. That means Shane Bowen is still the defensive coordinator and will probably remain the defensive coordinator for the rest of the year. So if you had Shane Bowen lasting Brian Daboll for the rest of this season on your bingo card, congratulations, because I didn't think that was going to happen. All right, so what can we expect from Mike Kafka moving forward as the head coach? Truthfully, at this point, folks, if you're looking for a complete overhaul of the offense, that's not going to happen. We're too far into the season for Kafka to blow everything up and implement his system. And what's interesting is when Daboll was the head coach, a lot of the Giants system was that old Buffalo Bills system that Daboll ran up there, with just a few tweaks here and there from the Kansas City Chiefs system that Kafka was a part of for so many years. So it's not as though you're going to see a whole lot of that Kansas City system start to infiltrate what the Giants do. But there are some things that Kafka obviously can do differently, starting with, things like the practice schedule, obviously, personnel selection. But here's the biggest thing that Kafka, in my opinion, needs to change, and that's the order of the quarterbacks. All right. So under Daboll, as we know, Dart was the starter and Russell Wilson was the backup. That needs to change moving forward. All right. No disrespect to Russell Wilson, but he is not a fit for the type of offense the Giants have run. And if Kafka is going to keep that same system, he's got to flip the order and he's got to move Jameis Winston into that role at QB2 and put Russell Wilson as QB3. I know it's a big downgrade for Russell Wilson. Again, he's a good guy. He's been a good soldier. But as we have seen the times that he's been asked to come in to play for Dart, he wasn't trusted to run the system. And it was just a whole different world, if you will, for him. And I go back to when the Giants made the switch to Jackson Dart. They basically threw out a lot of stuff they were running with Russell Wilson as the quarterback, and they implemented more design runs and just more fancy things with Jackson Dart, things that he could do well. And I've been saying all along, ladies and gentlemen, that Jameis Winston, even though you never know what you're going to get with him, and even though he could be erratic with, some of the chances he takes, he can run that system that the Giants have with Dart a lot better than Russell Wilson. So that's got to be the first thing that Mike Kafka changes upon, setting up the game plan. Okay, the next thing that I think needs to be changed is how the personnel is allocated. Under Daboll, I always got the impression that he went with his guys. And I get it. A lot of coaches will do that. They have their guys that they work with before, and they tend to lean on them because they know them. All right. So that would explain why, for example, Ray McLeod, who was with Daboll up in Buffalo at one point, probably got the nod on offense, getting called up from the practice squad over, say, little Jordan Humphrey, who granted doesn't have any more elevations left, but could have been signed to the 53-man roster, or Amir Smith Marset, who has been in the system, a little bit longer than Ray McLeod has. All right. But there's always been that kind of favoritism, Daboll loving a particular guy and just, that's his guy, for better or for worse. That's got to stop. All right. I get it. You know these guys, you know what they bring. Devin Singletary is another guy, but you can't coach that way. You've got to go with the best talent you have, not because you like a guy or not because the guy did you a favor or anything like that. And that to me was always a problem with Daboll. So hopefully Kafka won't have favorites moving forward. And that includes, maybe giving Jalen Hyatt a little bit more of an opportunity. So, we'll see if that changes. Some other things, obviously, the in-game coaching decisions. Some of the decisions Brian Daboll made were just downright a case of coaching not to lose. Coaching scared, dare I say. I go back to the to Sunday's game when they kicked the field goal, the 19-yard field goal, despite having 4th down and 1 at the 1. Come on. I still don't agree with that. And that leads me to the analytics thing. There were times when I think Brian Daboll leaned too heavily into analytics instead of using common sense. That to me is a lazy way of coaching. And I'm hoping Mike Kafka isn't lazy in that regard. Just use common sense. If you have this confidence in your players that you claim to have, then what do you need an analytics card to tell you what to do? It just never made any sense to me, to be honest with you. The design runs for Jackson Dart when he eventually comes back, and hopefully, we'll see if he comes back this week. I don't know that he will, but then again, I don't know how bad his concussion is. Reduce some of those. There is no reason to where that kid's got to be leading the league in design runs. I get it. The mobility is there. It's an asset, but like anything, too much can be too much. All right. The mobility, use that to buy time in the pocket, get guys open. We talk about, receivers aren't getting open for the Giants. Well, are they really being given a chance to get open? Or are the Giants just saying, you know what, the heck with that. Let's just do design runs because we know they're going to run or they're going to work. So, that's something. Protect Jackson Dart from himself because the kid, he plays very aggressively. He's not afraid to put his body on the line. He's going to have a short career unless he learns to better protect himself and stop, playing the role of Superman. So, these are just all things or some of the things that Mike Kafka can maybe implement a little differently. Now, will that mean a change in how they practice, the practice schedule or whatever? That remains to be seen. I haven't seen the new media schedule as of this recording, so I don't know if they're going to change things up. I don't know if they're going to, for example, be in pads, more often than what maybe they have been as allowed by the CBA. That stuff I don't know. So I'm curious to see once we get into the locker room on Wednesday, what the players have to say as far as the changes that Kafka implemented as the head coach. And, we might not see them all right away because look, it's a whirlwind. Okay. The Giants on Monday nights going into Tuesday, they spend that period game planning. So maybe Kafka hasn't had a whole lot of time to catch his breath, say, okay, I'm going to change this, that, and the other thing. So maybe some of these changes we won't see right away. We'll see them over the course of the next few weeks. But this is a golden opportunity for Kafka to really audition for the permanent head coaching job. All right, coming up next, what about Joe Schoen? We'll talk about that and what the Giants had to say about Joe Schoen right after this.
Today's show is brought to you by our friends over there at Peloton. Look, folks, it's time to break through the busiest time of the year with a brand new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus that's powered by Peloton IQ. It's Peloton's most elevated technology and equipment yet that gives you real-time guidance, and it gives you endless ways to move, whether you want to work out by yourself or if you want to work out with your favorite instructor, like my personal favorite, Alex Toussaint. He always gets me fired up to tackle the day. And the thing I like about Peloton, it helps me achieve more in less times. They have features that help you plan, stay motivated, track your progress, and Peloton IQ also provides personalized workout plans and recommendations. That's something that I use right now during the busiest time of the year covering the NFL. They plan my workouts for me based on my mood, my vibe, and also my favorite instructors. So make sure you check it out and use it because it also helps you correct your form in real time, and it maximizes your reps. It counts your reps so that you can do it smarter, safer, and more efficient. Let yourself run, lift, flex, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
All right, Giant fans, welcome back to this emergency podcast of Locked On Giants. Actually, this is our Tuesday show. You know, I was going to do a segment, a whole show actually, on General Manager Joe Schoen, but I could still do it for you guys if you guys want, but here's the thing. The Giants, in their statement that they released to the media, said that Joe Schoen will remain in his role as general manager and will lead the next search for a Giants head coach, all right? So Joe Schoen, not going anywhere. Should he? Well, we can talk about that on an upcoming show, all right? So let's just kind of talk a little bit about what the Giants had to say about Joe Schoen. Team co-owners John Mara and Steve Tisch, in a statement, said that they felt that Schoen assembled a good young nucleus. All right. Now, the results haven't been what they wanted, but the statement, the way it read, kind of pointed the finger at the coaching. Schoen, as I mentioned, is going to be kept to help lead the search. And this is important. The language is important here. Not help with the search, but lead the search. So Schoen it sounds like, is going to put together a list of potential head coaching candidates, do the initial groundwork, interview guys and whatnot, make recommendations to ownership as to who he thinks he could work best with, and they go from there. That's how I read the statement. Now, whether you agree with the decision to keep him or not, and look, I can make pros and con arguments about, whether he should stay and whether he should go. The bottom line, though, and I've said this before on the program, is that Schoen was on more solid ground than Daboll for numerous reasons. And I will get into that in another show. I will go through that, even though the decision has basically been made. But, here's the thing I think everybody needs to remember. When it comes to the state of the Giants right now, it's not all on one person, right? Brian Daboll had a big hand in it, but not everything is on Brian Daboll. Players, Brian Daboll doesn't go out there and drop passes or throw interceptions or commit, defensive pass interferences. That's not on him. That being said, it starts from the top. And, the simple fact that this stuff keeps happening week after week after week, a change had to be made at the coaching level. As far as Joe Schoen is concerned, he's done some things that you could sit there and you could say, okay, good move. For example, taking the risk on waiting to get Jackson Dart and then engineering a trade to get Jackson Dart at the bottom of the first round, 25th overall. The Brian Burns trade, which has really paid off for the team. That has been a good move. Has Joe Schoen been perfect? No. There are things he's done that I don't like, which I will tell you about in a show coming up, maybe tomorrow's show. We'll see how the timing goes. So no, Joe Schoen has not been perfect. But here's, I think, the takeaway that we need to remember. John Mara and Steve Tisch did not want to blow this whole thing up, because when you do blow it up, now you bring in a new GM who has his way of how he wants things scouted and how he, what kind of players he wants and what kind of coach he wants and all that stuff. So basically all the work that they've been doing the last 4 years, whether it, be promising or otherwise, all that gets thrown away. All the roster acquisitions, all that goes away. The Giants didn't want to go there. They felt that they had a good young core of players, as their statement said, that they just need to build on. So now the onus is on Joe Schoen for 2 reasons. Number one, to continue building up that roster. All right, there are some holes on that roster that still need to be addressed. There are some players on that roster that are dead wood that need to be removed from that roster, both financially and performance-wise. That's on the GM. Getting the coach in here, the right coach, that's going to be key. And I know some of you have said, they should go for John Gruden. They should go for Bill Belichick. I don't see that happening, folks. Not if those guys are going to want a bigger say, given their, accomplishments as NFL coaches. That's not going to happen. So that's something you need to keep in mind. If it's not going to be Kafka as the permanent head coach, and quite frankly, a lot of you ask me, okay, should it be Kafka or who would you pick? I'd like to see them get a guy in here who has a winning pedigree, right? Not somebody who, is brand new at the role and is feeling his way around. Because I think, it's interesting, when they hired Schoen and Daboll, I thought to myself, okay, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, but they're both brand new to their respective roles. And how's that going to work? Because it's not as though, Schoen was experienced and Daboll wasn't. And if Daboll had a problem, he could go to Schoen for advice. It didn't work that way. They were kind of feeling the roles out as they went along. Well, now you can say Schoen is experienced. So could he stick with Kafka? Well, we'll see how Kafka does. I don't think they should. I think they should just sweep all the coaches out. Maybe keep Carmen Brasillo. Maybe keep, Michael Gabriel, the special teams coordinator. I would definitely keep Dre Patterson, the defensive line coach. But I would sweep out the rest of them. But that's going to be up to whoever the Giants do end up hiring. And Joe Schoen, whether we like it or not, is going to lead that charge according to ownership and the statement that they put out. Now, as far as the next week goes, look, anytime you have a major shakeup, we'll see how the locker room responds. Lately, the locker room has kind of been going downhill in terms of the energy that's been coming out. It was a sharp contrast from week 1 to where it was last week. It was like the energy had sapped out of the locker room. We'll see if the energy comes back, and we'll see how that parlays into Sunday's game when the Giants host the Green Bay Packers. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Giants. As always, thank you so much for tuning in, spending part of your day with us here on Locked On Giants. For your next listen, get a double dose of the Locked On NFL podcast. Tyler, the Madman Rowland, gives you a shot of espresso to start your football day, while Tony Wiggins takes you into the barbershop for the smoothest breakdowns to end the day. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Giant fans, I'll be back tomorrow with an all-new episode of Locked On Giants. Thursday's crossover Thursday with Locked On Packers host Peter Bukowski. And, of course, we will continue with our 5 days a week here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Hope to see you again tomorrow.